Welcome to Paint Yourself into the Picture, healing conversations to help us create the best and brightest picture of our lives. I'm Reba, best-selling author, life coach, and manifesting guru, and I'm so glad you're here. We have a wonderful guest as part of our Healing Outside the Box series. But first, a 2-minute teaching. I think some of you have often heard me talk about filling our own cup. And the point I like to make about that is to be aware not just of the hand that's holding the cup, but the hand that's pouring from the vessel as well. So it's as if there's a dialogue happening inside of us. I had the privilege of studying with a woman named Marilyn Grayman, and she liked to call our participating entities inside ourselves our committee members. And I just love that description, and I find it to be extremely helpful. So I wanted to offer it to you and share it with you today. To think of the voices inside you as a committee member. And I think having that little shift in perspective really takes the onus off of ourselves. So that instead of asking ourselves, why did I do that to myself in terms of self-sabotage or something? Or why can't I have what I want when we're trying to have something happen in our life and it's not happening? Instead of why can't I and why didn't I and why do I, it becomes, oh, there's this other part of me who feels this way about it. There's a committee member I'm hearing from here. So that opens up all kinds of modalities of healing. And I wanted to offer that suggestion to you. How does that sit with you to start to think of those as not just as that's me, but that's one of my committee members? Please leave your comments below. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our very special guest today as part of the Healing Outside the Box series, Charan Surdhar. She is a geneticist turned epigeneticist. She works specifically with genetic diseases, assisting to release the energy in the form of emotions, beliefs, and perceptions that get in the way of the natural flow of the body to bring about positive gene expression. This is the revolutionary new field of epigenetics. Charan Surdhar, I'm so thrilled to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Reba. It's a pleasure, and I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit. It's very unusual to find someone who has such an accomplished career in the sciences to make this kind of a shift. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? And then, of course, please share a little bit more about what epigenetics is.
Mm-hmm. So I had a vision when I was younger to help people. And it's just something that I just saw. It was around the time of the AIDS epidemic, and I think I was about 11, and I really felt deeply for what was happening on the planet at that time, because I was watching everyone ostracizing people with AIDS, and they just didn't understand them. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to find a cure for that. And so that's where it was a passion in me that just ignited. And ended up studying genetics and human genetics and studying for 13 years in the laboratory. I never worked on AIDS, but it was finding mutations and genetic abnormalities in individuals with blood disorders and just working in the laboratory doing that with DNA. But while I was working there, I felt incomplete because of that. What had been ignited in me as a child was that feeling of being able to help people. And although I was finding these mutations and genetic abnormalities, I didn't feel like I was helping anyone. It was just the information was being given to the medical doctors, and then they would then use that information as to how they were going to prescribe the medication. And so I just I felt incomplete. And so I was on a journey, and it's something that I grew up with anyway. Like, my parents had taught me to meditate and yoga, and so I'd kind of had that. And so I continued to explore that. while I was working in the laboratory. And I came across, certain books and things that would, Bruce Lipton's book, Biology of Belief, was a huge turning point for me, because that then helped bring everything together. So it's from the genetics to the epigenetics. And that is how my journey began on this side, moving away from the genetics. And going back to your question with regards to what is epigenetics, then it's, if we go back to look at genetics first, and then we can understand what epigenetics is. Genetics is the field of study of DNA and how it impacts us. So, for instance, if you have heart disease in the family or diabetes, it's like, oh my God, it's going to happen to me. Or if there's cancer, breast cancer, and then you feel like, oh my God, that's going to happen to me because I've got the gene, and so on and so forth. But what if there's another possibility? That's genetics. Genetics makes us feel like we're victims to our biology. Mm-hmm. And that's in itself so disempowering. It disempowers us to the extent that actually the body reacts to that. Its immune system is impacted. You go into fight-flight response, which then, the body's not looking after the organs. It's more geared for running away. It's an underlying stress that happens. So you really are disempowered by that information. And what happens is that when we move to epigenetics, I've got the sun still shining in my face. What happens with epigenetics is that we actually move into empowerment. And that's the difference. And how and why is that? Epigenetics is the word epi means above the genes. So it's what is above the genes that controls our DNA. So the best way to explain this is, if we think of DNA as a blueprint, an architect will create a blueprint of a house that he wants to build, or he or she wants to build. And that blueprint in itself doesn't really do anything. Mm-hmm. It just exists. It's just created and it exists. And then it depends on the builders and everyone else who puts an input and creates that. It's the same way with the DNA. The DNA is a blueprint. And from that, everything else is then created by depending on what information the DNA receives. And so this gets even more interesting, because it's the information. What is that information that the DNA is receiving? This is really fascinating, because it can be information that we have experienced, things that we've experienced in our lives. Could be traumas, different things. It could be anything in our life. But anything that we experience has always got, you are into manifesting and you understand this. But it's like, if we have a frequency that's existing and showing up for us, a trauma that shows up for us, there's always another frequency within us that's we're resonating with, and then that shows up in our life. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there is this information that is ancestral, or something that even our ancestors have gone through, that is being passed on to us. Mm-hmm. They may have gone through famine or drought. We've had wars, we've had holocausts. I mean, it's horrendous what human society's been through. And so we just don't know. And all that information gets passed on to us. And so it's all kind of hanging around the DNA. And that in itself then impacts how the DNA is expressed. There's a really interesting study where they did a study with adopted children. And what they found was that children were adopted into a family where there was a predominant cancer, a particular kind of cancer. those children that were adopted into that family ended up with the same cancer. So it's the fact that it's something that they, the beliefs or the perceptions in that family that they absorbed, and that then resulted in that. So this is epigenetics. It's so empowering to know that actually it's stuff around the DNA, not the DNA, because when it's the DNA, we think, well, we can't change the DNA.
Right.
And when it's epigenetics, we know we can change the information around the DNA. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, when we know that, we get empowered just knowing that. Yeah. And the other thing is that every gene gets expressed 30,000 different ways. Right?
I was thinking it's very complicated because you've got this blueprint, the DNA, and then you've got the expression of the blueprint. And it's like you said, it's like building a house, and there's so many things that can go right, of course, but there's so many things that can go wrong. So you've got that journey between the blueprint and the expression where all this epigenetics is happening. So that's kind of a fascinating stretch of road.
Yes.
Here and there. How do you navigate that?
So how your question being, how do you navigate to get to how it?
Okay, so you've got, let's say, a gene to be healthy. Let's say you've got a blueprint for health, and yet you're, God forbid, born into a family that expresses breast cancer. Is that what you mean, that there's this blueprint for health, but then there's the expression is the part that's going off, or is the actual blueprint for cancer? That's what I guess that should be the first question.
So we've got the blueprint, and say, for instance, this blueprint has the gene for cancer. So let's say, for example, and your mother had it, you have it, and so how a build builds from a blueprint, like you said, can be so many different ways. Right. In the same way, even though you have that, it can be expressed 30,000 different ways. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It's just expressed in a different way.
I see.
Does that answer your question?
So there'd be the possibility, just to try to translate it into something like I can understand, or maybe the viewers can understand. So it might be expressed as a few stray cancer cells that get consumed and flushed, or it might be expressed as a full-blown disease. Is that what you're saying, that there's an array of choice?
No. Well, yes and no. Yes, in that, yes, it could be that, depending on what information the genes are getting. But the reason why it's empowering is that when we can release this information around the DNA, it actually allows us to come back to health.
Okay.
And be health. That's what I mean by that.
I see. So there's a sort of a super blueprint that's a healthy blueprint.
This is the way I see it. There's a consciousness, there's an awareness within us. It flows through us, it flows through nature. We are that perfection. We already are that perfection. But when we have all these filters of ancestral stuff around contributing to how the DNA is expressed, it's like that's a frequency in itself, and the DNA is listening to that frequency. But we also have this power within us, this awareness, this huge potential to be health and well-being, because it is our innate beingness to be that. And so when we change that frequency from being to listening to the ancestral stuff and tuning into the perfection that we are, that's when everything just switches over.
I see. I happen to agree with you. I understand what you're saying, and that's my belief as well, that
I keep getting a third eye.
You're all lit up. I happen to believe, very similarly, that we have this rightness and perfection and abundance and joy. That's our true inheritance. And then we have our human inheritance, which are the limiting beliefs, etc. So I see it on my terms. I don't express it, I don't think I've ever talked about DNA, but I think it's a similar idea. So how do you work with a client then in this?
The way that I work is, with quantum physics, they say whatever you focus on is what you're going to get. And they've done experiments where, they've shown that everything's a wave, and then it's a wave of possibilities. And then when you focus on something, it becomes the particle, which is then manifested into the physical. And the way that I work with clients is to actually focus in on that perfection. And when we do that, there's only that. And then when I'm working with them, whatever I'm doing with them, it's going to be that which then it's holding that frequency of that perfection, which then they begin to resonate with. And then it allows for that to come forth.
Wow. What a switch from a scientific type of approach. I mean, I do see that it is also a form of science, but what a different approach, in terms of our, let's say, our accepted, idea of what science is. How has it been for you to make that kind of a switch in terms of what you do?
I know when I was in the laboratory, I used to do all this stuff, I was known for being the quirky one. And I used to have to keep my mouth shut a little bit because it was not quite accepted. But saying that, there were a couple of doctors who were aware of my work, and they would get me to go on the ward and send some healing or do something with patients. But it's fun. That's all I can say. It's fun. It's fun knowing that we can be this empowered, and knowing that actually we are not victims to our genes, and to be able to spread that message to people, to say that it lifts me. It just brings me so much joy, and it's my passion. So it's fun.
It's interesting because I think science, it was imagined, I think, maybe years ago, I don't know if now anymore, but that science was going to be the great liberator, the great, uplifter, and the great answer to all our problems. And it's so, just kind of ironic that the science is actually can be disempowering, as you say.
It's catching up. I mean, there's so much now that shows that, the old ancient esoteric stuff is being complemented by the science now. And, I remember when I was in the laboratory, there was always that argument of whether is it nature or nurture, what's causing this gene to be this way? Is it, what is it? And I used to find that debate very, I wasn't very much into debates, but it was just something, I just couldn't answer that question within me even, because I felt there was no answer. It felt like it was beyond that. Mm-hmm. And now I do know that it is beyond that. It's actually both, and even more than that.
It's so incredibly subtle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like a flat, this is, the house they lived in, that kind of an answer. So talk a little bit about frequencies. You mentioned before we actually started recording that you work with frequencies. So can you just sort of share a little bit about your work with frequencies?
Well, it started a couple of years ago when I went to this conference, and there was a Russian scientist there, and he was talking about how he's using frequencies, and he was presenting about a particular patient that he had. And she had a genetic disorder that she was under 5, and she was going to die. So what he did was he had this machine that he could take the frequency of her cousin and play this frequency to her. which he did, or he got her mother to do it. And her symptoms went away, and she was normal. So this is like this is how important frequencies are. It's like, you and I, you have a frequency, I have a frequency. We're resonating with each other. The listeners have their own frequency. We all have that frequency. And so what frequency are we resonating with? Because if we can tune into our perfection, like I said, that's a frequency. And as we do that, what happens is then it unfolds and it unravels, and we become that. So what happened as I listened to him speak, actually there was another really fun experiment. He took some salamander eggs and frog eggs, and he took the frequency of the salamander eggs and played it to the frog eggs. And when the frog eggs hatched, they were salamanders. Yeah. So isn't that incredible? It's like that. How powerful frequencies are.
How do you capture a frequency?
Well, this is what happened. Well, he's got a machine, and he uses that, but I don't have a machine. But what I do have is the divine. I have the creator. We all have that awareness, source energy running through us. And we also have intention. And using that, I become the vehicle for that frequency to come through. And so I create personal frequencies for people where it's like, each of us has our own frequency. There is white light, but there's 7 colors to that. And so, we're each another color, and we make up that white light. And so I just tune into that person's frequency, and I create that for them, or allow for it to come through. And those have been really powerful to combine with the work, because then they have something to listen to in between sessions, so that they're always tuning into their perfection.
So do you do it through spoken word, or is it like a hum, or is it musical, or people talk about Tibetan bells and other things, like other tools that people use for frequency work? It's
actually silent. I sit and allow for it to come through, and then I do put music on it, but it is a silent frequency.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, I'm really amazed at what you do, and how do people find you?
They can go to my website. It's www.charansurdhar.com. That's CHARANSURDHAR. And my social media buttons are on there. I've got some really fun videos I've created on animated versions of things around science. Like why we get infections, and why, what is epigenetics, and so people can check those out as well on YouTube.
Wow, great. Is there anything else I do have a question that I usually ask most of my guests, which is, what did it take for you to free your voice? Because there's a lot of people watching this that are, I think, stepping into new careers and stepping into new leadership roles. And those are the kind of women I work with in my work as well. So I ask people such as yourself who are out there actually sharing this wisdom at this level, what did it take for you to free your voice?
That's been a progression. Working in the laboratory, I had to kind of put a lid on it a little bit.
Yes.
But as I stopped working there, and I moved forward with what I wanted to do, or was inspired to do, the voice began to open up in itself. So it was a combination. But more recently, there has been this more of a pull within me to open my mouth, and that there's no point. The divine and the source energy for each one of us wants to come through, and we are the paintbrush for that. And when we can just get out the way and allow that paintbrush to do its magic, the creator to come through and do its magic with us, then it's like, well, who are we to get in the way of that? Because there's so much magnificence in each one of us. And I've really got that in a big way in the last few weeks. In fact, just get out the way and just open your mouth, because people need to hear this.
Right. And I just have one more question that I thought of before, and I want to make sure to ask you, which is, you mentioned that you work with genetic diseases, kind of the biggies, the diabetes, the cancer, but it seems that really everybody needs this. Why do you choose to work? I guess the question is, do you work with everyone, or are you somehow drawn to this type of a challenge?
I am drawn to that because I'm always one for a challenge. But you're right. It's for everyone. I was just working with someone today, and as I was working, he was saying that my child just been this way, particularly angry, or and I said, well, okay, let's have a look. And we did, and we found that he had a broken heart, and it was as a result of an inherited energy. So he, as soon as conception happened, this child had this broken heart energy, and it's so amazing. Exactly, it's so amazing to be able to clear that up for a child, that they can then have their life, in a more fuller way than going through life with a broken heart. I'm talking energetically here, and it's just makes such a difference. And I just know that it's like we all come in here with baggage, all of us. We all have inherited energies that we've come in with at conception. It's just transferred to us. And how it shows up, whether it shows up as a phobia, whether it shows up as a relationship issue, whether it shows up as depression, we don't know. But so many times there's so much there that we don't even know what we've got. And when we can then, I always say to people, it's not your fault. Because we have a tendency to say, well, what have I done to create this?
Exactly.
And, actually, what if it's because of ancestral energies that you've inherited, what your ancestors went through? And there's so many studies that, show this. And so anything that you're experiencing, anyone's experiencing, it could be as a result of anything else. So ancestral. And so, yeah, everyone, it's a benefit to anyone, really.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we have this last question. And it actually reminds me a little bit of the committee members, where it's not what have I done, or why can't I, or why aren't I? It's this other part, it's these pieces that are speaking up, and it's very mysterious, and you approach it in a really unique and exciting way that I think is so beneficial to so many people. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the show. I think you have so much to offer, and I hope the viewers get in touch with you to work with you, because I think it just could be an amazing experience. So I encourage you to all do that. And thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And if you like what you're seeing, please stay in touch. My mission is to help women know that it's their time to shine. And if that resonates, then I can help you make that happen in a sustainable and fulfilling way. My website is rebalinker.com. My Facebook group is Leaders in Self-Love. Please subscribe and like the video. I love to read your comments. Join us again next week for another healing conversation. Until then, remember that this is your turn to shine. Learn how to paint yourself into the picture, because this is how we heal.